There comes a point in everyone's life when our contentment and routines are disrupted by God. It might start off as a faint whisper or a nagging feeling, but deep down inside, God is kindling a fire within us. We can try to shut it out and ignore His calling, or we can embrace the disturbance God's placed within us. But whether we fight for it or against it, each of us must choose what to do when God interrupts our lives.
So we've been talking about what it feels like or what it's like or what we're supposed to do when God disrupts our life. Now, I am not a major, I don't live in God disrupting my life, but I do live in distraction. Like that moment right then when I was looking for the right word and I almost just left the room, and just left it. Now, I don't know, I don't get distracted by the things that distract most people. Things that distract me are things like shiny things, okay? Those always distract me. People, I get something happens and hey, I'm supposed to do this, and then I get distracted, oh, let's go do that, and I forget to do this. Like Chris, I owe you a call from Thursday, and I just remembered it. And so, so it's been, it's just how life goes for me. I constantly am being distracted. Now, we've been talking about how God disrupts our life, how God steps in and calls us. And I want us to understand something. That's the case for all of us. God has a call on all of our lives. He wants to work in and through us. Even if you're here today and you're not sure about this whole faith thing, I want you to know that God has a plan that He wants to accomplish in and through your life. And it's powerful. It's far bigger and better than anything you could ever imagine for your own life. It's far grander. So God's got a call on all of our lives. And at some point in our life, we all go through the exact same, cycle where we're comfortable in life. And then God disrupts our comfort and kind of catalyzes us towards something bigger, better. And maybe you're here this morning because God brought a catalyst in your life and said, you should go to Journey, you should go to church, you should investigate faith, there's something in your life that brought you to a point where you said, man, being here today is more important than being at home asleep today for some reason, right? So God moves us, right, somehow from comfort to catalyst, but then it happens to all of us, so don't feel ashamed. There's nobody pointing fingers at you because we all get distracted at some point. There's some point that something comes up in our life. Something like, man, I've been doing that for a while and haven't seen any real product in my life. And so it's easy to get distracted, right? For some of us, we slept in one weekend when we were 19 years old. And we said, I'll go to church maybe next week. And one weekend turned to two, and the next thing you know, you're 35, right? And you're going, man, I really want to raise my kids in church, and they're 11. It's time to go to church, and maybe that's how your story goes. And I get it, because, man, it's easy to get distracted. We get off track super easy. Comfort, catalyst, distraction. If we can get out of the distraction, it leads us to action. We can change the world. God does some pretty amazing stuff. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about everybody from Abraham, and who his name started out as Abram. That's confusing, as if Bible stories aren't confusing enough. We have to change names in the middle of them. Then there's Nehemiah. We talked about him and how God gave him a mission to rebuild part of Jerusalem. Man, amazing stuff that God did with it. Then we talked about Esther. We talked about Peter. We talked about John the Baptist. Today, we're talking about probably one of my favorite Bible characters now, right? I've had lots of favorite Bible characters. This is epic, okay? Epic is epic. It's that kind of deal. Samson, okay? Now, if you don't know about Samson, lots of the stories around the idea that you've seen of strong men who go in and take care of business, all kind of inspired by Samson's story. Samson is I asked Bryce earlier if I could say bad butt, you know what I'm saying? And he said no. So he was a bad dude, okay? You get what I'm saying? And Sheila's probably so thankful for Bryce right now. But he was the original dude, right? He was John Wick before John Wick was a thing, right? I mean, killing people with pencils, nothing compared to Samson. Now, if you grew up around Sunday school, you probably know some of this stuff, or maybe you've heard of it, because Samson's a common story that we all kind of just share. Even in our culture, you hear stories about Samson. Even the name Samsonite means what? Strong, right? They're strong, stable luggage. You can have a gorilla jump up and down on your Samsonite luggage. It's all inspired by this story. It's strong. Because, man, he had some killer stuff, literally, that happened around him. One time, he was walking down this trail, and a lion attacks him. A giant lion attacks him. And God gives him the strength. It's so cool to think about. He grabs the lion's jaw and rips the lion's head open. That's bad, dude. That's serious. Now, listen, this week, I was studying commentaries and got my head too much in the technical stuff and all the stuff about it. And so I'm like, I need something creative to get my head out of the details. And so I watched the movie Samson. It's on Netflix, by the way. And it's a Christian movie, but the acting is only medium bad, okay? Not like regular Christian movies where it's terrible, okay? So, but this is pretty good. There's actually good action sequences. You can skip the acting if you want. But it kind of pulls out some of this story. It was really helpful to me, kind of get me out of the detail world. But man, when we look at these stories, they're powerful. There's one time where he makes a bet. Literally, they don't tell you that junk in Sunday school, right? He makes a bet with a guy, and he says, listen, if you can break this riddle, I'll give you 30 Philistine tunics. And he loses the bet because he gets sabotaged by a woman. Go figure that one. And then, so anyways, he gets this whole thing done. He goes out and kills 30 dudes so that he could get their clothes and settle the bet. That's pretty bad, right? There's another time where he gets upset because they kind of pulled a fast one on him with this woman that he kind of had his eye on, this woman that he loved, and he gets mad at them. And so he captures a bunch of foxes and ties their tails together and ties a torch to them and sets them free. And he just sets fire to the joint, right? This dude was a redneck bad dude, right? Okay. Because what's not redneck about tying tails of foxes together, right? I mean, you're like, that's pretty awesome. If you don't think that's redneck and strong, there's another time he gets confronted by 1,000 Philistine soldiers out to kill him, and he is like the Trojan horse, but he's the Trojan and the horse. He's the guy inside and the horse, and he gets delivered to him, and 1,000 soldiers, and he picks up a donkey's jawbone. How am I not supposed to say it? Okay, but so he picks up this donkey's jawbone and beats 1,000 soldiers to death. That's cool, right? Now, listen, I get that sometimes, like the Bible, church, faith, especially if you're a guy, this stuff can get a little bit, I don't know, it can be boring, or it could be kind of, you can maybe perceive it like it's very female or very, kind of touchy-feely. This is not touchy-feely stuff, okay? Judges 13-16. Read that junk. There's more blood there than 300, okay? This is good stuff, and it's powerful. But here's the thing that I'm struggling with, and I struggle with this all week long. I got to cover 4 chapters, right? 4 chapters in Samson's life, and man, it's so powerful. How do you pick one of those stories? How do you pick, let's do the 1,000 soldiers? No, let's do the lion. That's killer stuff, right? How do you pick one of these stories? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to understand something. We're going to talk about his story a lot. And I really want to encourage you to go home from here, and one of the next steps you can take is just reading Judges 13-16. It'll take you about 15 minutes. I mean, it's just powerful. And I'm going to give you the context for it, the bigger story into it. When you go home and you dive in, you walk through it, you'll be like, oh, I get it. I see what you're saying. Because every single one of us, you and me, we get stuck in the same cycle Samson gets stuck in. We get stuck in the same thing. Now, here's the deal. I have a calling in my life. You have a calling in your life. I'm not fully recognizing it, and you're not fully recognizing it. And neither was Samson. Samson kept getting stuck in the same cycle. His cycle didn't go from comfort, catalyst, distraction to action. It went comfort, catalyst, distraction, and then like the instructions on a shampoo bottle, right? Rinse and repeat, right? That's how I felt. Like I go through this comfort, that catalyst. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to do something good. He goes to do something good. He gets distracted. It's usually a woman. It's a pretty powerful story, how that happens in our lives, guys. Gets distracted by this thing. It winds up caving everything. Then he goes back and repents, rinse, and repeat, and just goes through the same cycle. He never gets to a point till the very, very end where he really begins to even fully realize some of what God wanted to accomplish in his life, because Samson had this call on his life since before he was born. Before he was born, he was called to be a judge for the nation of Israel. Now, a judge is kind of a phrase we don't use, because we use the word judge, but we don't mean it that way. It's not like he judged between what's right and wrong. He was the leader of Israel before Israel had a monarchy, before there was a kingship, before David, right? Before that kind of stuff, before Solomon. Those stories are stories of kings. A judge had a slightly different role. His job was largely military leader. So he had a call on his life. It was a good call, because he's a big dude, really strong, literally godly strength. I mean, he's huge, right? I mean, able to do unbelievable things. And he's a military leader with a huge call on his life. And what's amazing about it is he never quite realizes his full potential in God, because he misses stuff. And he experiences the same exact parts of our story that you and I do every single day. And here's why. Because you and I and Samson are under a constant effort of the enemy to take us out. You, your life, your family, every part of you is under a constant effort of the enemy to take you out of play, to get you to not recognize the fullness of what God wants to do in your life. You're even experiencing some of that attack or effort right now. You're saying, oh, well, not me. I'm not. I don't know that I could really ever do anything that big, that good, that amazing, right? There's a part of you that goes, well, maybe when I was younger, or maybe when I did this, or maybe when this happened in my life. There's a part of you that something in you is whispering that you're not capable or you're not called. That is the exact same voice that Samson heard and that I hear and everyone else in this room hears. It's an effort of the enemy to take you out of play, because he wants nothing resembling you accomplishing the fullness of what God's called you to be a part of. So here's the thing that's important for us to get in this process, is that there are a handful of things that Samson full on tries. And he's got them in spades, right? But they aren't enough. And you're going to read them as you read through this story. As you go home and you read through those 4 chapters, you're going to understand. You're going to be like, yeah, I see it now. I see the kind of the Sunday school lesson peeled back, because there's so much that they didn't tell us in those stories, right? There's so much that flannel graph, despite its amazing abilities, cannot teach us about Samson. And that's one. Did anybody else not grow up with flannel? That was funny. Does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about when I say flannel graph? Like 8 people. Okay, all right. So never mind. We won't be making any more flannel graph jokes. All right. So, but here's the deal. There's so much more that God wants us to understand as we peel back that first layer of understanding of it beyond just the stories. It's powerful to us, because here's the deal. Samson had it all. I mean, he had all the calling, he had all the strength, he had all of the action. I mean, he was amazing. He had the whole package, right? He's everything all the excuses you're saying, I'm not influential, I'm not this, I'm not capable, I'm not a leader, I'm not that. He had all that stuff and still failed miserably. So understand something. What he thought, or what we think qualifies us to be something significant, is not at all what qualifies us. Because understand something, story after story in Samson's life will prove it to us, that calling alone is not enough. I mean, we got to get a little picture of who he is. Like, now, you got to get this, because to do this, I have to kind of, a little bit of a theology lesson, okay? So if you get bored with this stuff, some of you are geeking out right now, and you're like, oh, yeah, I like this stuff. And some of you are like, what does that word mean? I have no idea. I want to just tell you this. The first time I read this about 20 years ago, I didn't know what it meant, and I immediately thought it was heresy, because I thought when somebody said that a particular person in the Old Testament was a type of Christ, I thought, how could you be a type of Christ? There's only one Christ, and I got bent out of shape. I was 20. What do you want? And so here's the deal. Samson is a type of Christ. What I mean by that is that he does things, and he's called to do things that are typical of the Christ. So he's kind of a forerunner in some ways, that has his life in a lot of ways is prophetic. Not pathetic, that's my life. prophetic, right? He has a prophetic life where the things that Samson does are meant to point the way to Jesus, to do things that are typical or typish of the Christ. And so when he does things bringing salvation to the Jews, like bringing a level of salvation and protection to the people of Israel, that's a big deal. So he had a calling on his life that honestly is bigger than our callings. Like we all have a calling on our life. He had a unique calling on his life. We do things that reflect Jesus. He did things that typify the Christ. It's a big deal. So he had a calling that was significant. And you would think that a person with a calling like that could do something unbelievable, because you're like, man, big calling, big results. But not so much with Samson. Because even though he was called, he still found constant distraction in the people around him. The people, for some reason, he struggled to rise to lead them. The women in his life just always seemed to be able to pull the right string and get him off track. Something just seemed to be a bigger question than the calling alone could answer. He was called, like you and I are called, but bigger, and it wasn't enough. And then you go through life, and he gets stuck in this same cycle, comfort, catalyst, distraction. Where's your distraction? I mean, like not just your distraction, like something shiny, like I was saying, but what are the things that catch you and take you off track? What are the things in your life that you can go, man, that's the thing that seems to keep coming back to me? It's my insecurity. Is it a substance? Is it your anger? Is it pornography? What is it that just seems to constantly be reoccurring in your life that takes you out? For Samson, it seemed to be the women in his life. For us, it could be something totally different. But no matter how big our calling is, there are times in our life where we experience some traction and then we find out a distraction and we think that we can just will it away. You ever done that? Like, I will never get angry like that again. And then you get angry with yourself for getting angry, and then, or you're like, I'm not going to feel insecure. And then guess what happens? Something else happens that undercuts that. And you wind up feeling that full sense of insecurity again. Or what happens in our life is we try to willpower those things away and they don't work, because here's the deal. Calling alone isn't enough, and strength alone isn't enough. Samson was known for any one thing. If I said the word Samson, you would immediately think strong. Everybody thinks that. I mean, it's the reason why someone like Samsonite luggage would name it that, because the idea of it, just even outside of a biblical culture, outside of church, means strength. But strength didn't cut it for Samson. I mean, he could will things to happen and force things into existence that you and I could only dream of. He had the ability to just make it happen. I think of the story and I go, why wouldn't he just do this? Or why wouldn't he just do that? Because strength isn't enough. Now, you're going to hear this name a ton, but Dallas Willard is an author, a writer, a phenomenal thinker, and he usually says things that I can't possibly understand. But he says a few things that I'm like, wow, that's powerful. And that's this one. Habits eat willpower for breakfast. The way that we live our lives, the habits that we're in, the way we think, the way we act, the way we do things, those things eat our willpower for breakfast, right? You haven't got enough willpower to overpower the way you think and the way you live. You can't possibly will something into being because your habits are always undermining it. And your habits will eat your willpower for breakfast every single time. Man, it's really powerful when you start to think about it. How powerfully weak we are. Our calling, our high calling, our value, like what we've got and where we're headed isn't enough. Our strength, our abilities, our leadership, our voices, our stuff isn't enough. There's nothing that I can do to overpower the way I'm living. There's no willpower that's strong enough. Calling's not enough. Our willpower, our strength isn't enough. And this is where the church sets in. We always have a tendency to kind of go, well, Those things aren't enough, folks. You got to do something different, right? You got to act different, live different, do something different. We love to put guilt on people's shoulders. You know why we love to? I got to be honest with you, I'm a pastor. Like, you know why we like to put guilt on people's shoulders? Because guilt gives us a platform to control people. Because it gives us a way that we can kind of get a little bit of a different behavior out of people without really having to depend on God to do it. If we can put enough guilt on your shoulders, then you kind of line up, right? And you kind of do the things that you're supposed to do. And when you do things you were supposed to do, our lives as leaders work better. I'm just being honest with you. That's why you feel guilty. It's why you feel shamed more times than not when you come to church. Because we're, generally speaking, much more interested in your behavior lining up than we are with you really experiencing something of change in your life. I heard a story this week. A guy walks into a bar. I love these stories. A guy walks into a bar and he walks up to the bartender and he says to the bartender, "I have 3 mugs of beer." So he goes, "Okay, that's kind of weird," but he pours him 3 mugs of beer and he goes over in the booth and sits by himself and drinks them. Now, this happens day after day, after day after day. And eventually comes up to order the 3 mugs of beer and the guy goes, "Hey, you know, that stuff starts going flat as soon as I pour it for you. So it would taste better to you if I just poured one, at a time and you came up and drank them." He said, "I know, but here's the deal. Like, I'm drinking for me and my brothers, my 2 brothers. We always just drink together, but moved apart, moved away from each other. And so now I just get 3 mugs of beer and I drink like I'm drinking with my brothers, kind of in honor of them." He goes, "Oh, that's kind of a cool story. Still a dumb way to drink beer, but here you go." So he gives him his beer, goes off. About a month later, comes back and he orders 2 mugs of beer. And he goes, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. Man, I'm sorry for your loss. You lost one of your brothers." And he goes, "Oh no, I didn't lose one of my brothers. We started going to the Baptist church and I had to quit drinking, but that doesn't keep my brother from drinking." So like, but here's the deal though. We love to heap guilt on you because it modifies your behavior enough. And the action isn't enough. Like, just like calling and just like our strength, just lining up because you're supposed to line up and doing the right things isn't enough either. So that's the hardest part about it though, isn't it? Because that's what the outcome we want more times than not. If I could just get my behavior in line, if I could just get this, if I could just follow the rules, if I could just, not get angry with my kids, if I could just not be insecure, if I could just not struggle with pornography, if I could just not do that or get a part of it, if I just weren't greedy enough, if I could just get my behavior lined up, man, it would be so much better. I would feel so much more freedom. But the problem is that your actions alone aren't enough either. Because here's the truth. Our minds get overwhelmed easily, don't they? Our will, our desire gets overwhelmed so easily. Again, Dallas Willard says this: the desire overpowers will primarily by obsessing the mind. You ever see your mind get obsessed with something? Where you start with one step and you're like, "I'm just going to entertain that one thought of insecurity because I'm trying to manage it and figure it out." And what happens, right? Your will gets overpowered by the obsession of your mind. The enemy just pulls you into that spiral. And it's never a spiral that goes up, right? It's always a spiral that goes down. It never fills you up. It never moves you forward closer to Jesus. It always puts you more and more desperate. Things get worse and worse because desire has this way of obsessing our minds and dragging us away. So your will, your power, your strength, your actions are not enough because it's so easy to obsess the part that is stuck. So I hear your frustration. I mean, like, at least it's my frustration. So if my calling's not enough, right, and my strength's not enough, and it's even my stinking actions aren't enough, you're telling me that I could do what I'm called to do and be strong about it and even do the right thing, and it's still not going to cut it, then what's missing? Let me just show it to you this way. Again, Dallas Willard, sorry. There's this circle diagram. Check this out. This kind of, basically summarizes who we are as a human being. Your soul is made up of your social life, right? Your body, your mind, and your spirit. Your body is that action piece of you, right? The things that you do. Your mind is the way that you think your calling, or your that piece of you that moves forward, your will, or your soul, that heart piece of you, that middle part called your spirit, that part of you that just moves. There's something inside of you. Now here's the question: if we can't get there, if we can't really win the battle, if we can't get out of this problem where we go from comfort to action to distraction, and then back to comfort, action, and distraction, and we never get to the point where we find traction and action, right? What is it that we're supposed to do? The problem is that we approach our will and our power and our calling and even our actions as if they're our own. The truth of this is that we'll only find real traction in our walk. And this is where Samson finally got to at the very end of the story. That submission is really the key. Submission is the only way to win. It's not just your obedience. It's not just your calling. It's not just your willpower. And it's not even your actions. It's the submission of your heart. Samson found himself at the end of chapter 18. At the end of chapter 18, he finds himself in the palace. His eyes have been gouged out, right? He's completely blind, and his hair has been cut, but it's been growing for a while. And he gets to a place where he's got his hands on the pillars, and he literally says to him, "Let me lean on the pillars," because he's exhausted, and they just want to make a fool out of him. So they're glad to let him rest, because this big, strong man that was so well known, right, is now needing to lean against a pillar. And he prays, and he gets to this place where he understands this truth, that my calling wasn't enough, my willpower wasn't enough, even doing great things wasn't enough. What was enough is when he got to a place where he said, "God, I realize that what I've been doing is wrong, and that what I really need to do is not try to do the right thing on my own, but to give you my heart." And he just says, "God, just use your servant." And he pushes those pillars out of the way, and the whole place comes tumbling down, and he dies in the process. Submission is the only way to win. You know, when we play poker, I know that seems unrelated, but when you play poker, you're sitting around a circle. We're not in a Baptist church, you can admit it. So we get the cards, and you look at the cards, and the idea of poker is that you've got a certain amount of chips over here that are yours, and you've got a hand that you some way bet some of these chips that my hand is better than the other hands at the table that I can't see. Now, there are sometimes in poker when you look at your hand and you're like, this is a really good hand. And you might be tempted to maybe wager more than what you would normally have wagered. But there might be a time where you look at it and you think, you read the other players at the table, and you look at it and you think about it, and you're like, you know what? I'm all in. Which means that you take all of your chips and bet them all on this one hand, that what I've got here is better than others. Now, the other thing is you're maybe trying to intimidate the other people to back out. But you really don't know what's in their hands. You only know what's in yours. The all-in bet is crazy. Because really what you're saying is, I'm just taking a chance. I'm taking a risk that what I've got in my hand is better than what you've got in your hand. So in poker, maybe the idea of going all in is the worst idea ever, because you risk everything on what you don't know. The opposite is true of faith. What's true in faith when it comes to Jesus is the only safe place to be is all in. The only way to follow Jesus is to give him everything. Everything that's not submitted to Jesus, everything that's not under his authority and control, everything that's not pushed to the middle with Jesus is at risk. The only safe place to be is to bet everything on who Jesus is. That's what Samson recognized, was that his calling and his power and his actions weren't enough, because God wasn't looking for his calling and his power and his actions. He was just looking for his heart. So here's where you are today. Are you willing to consider letting Jesus have your heart? That's really the biggest question. At the end of it, I put this thing called the VIM victory. Dallas calls this is kind of the way our lives are wired. Vision, intention, and means. We do everything through this VIM kind of paradigm. You have a vision for what you want to accomplish. You have the intentions to accomplish it, and you have the means by which you accomplish it. It's not brain surgery to figure out vision, intention, and means. But here's the thing. If our vision is off, then our intentions and means don't matter. That's where Samson was off. Samson didn't quite catch the vision of what God wanted in his heart. So his intentions and means were off. The same struggle happens in our life. When we get caught on the distraction, our vision is about us. It's about serving ourselves. It's about being a better Christian and earning or feeling better about ourselves. But when our vision is off, our intentions and means don't matter. So where is it that you can start today? By simply beginning to develop some vision correction. But just simply saying, God, I just want to see my journey with you the way you see my journey with you. I want to see my distraction, whether it's your anger, your insecurity, your lust, your greed, whatever it is. I want to see my distraction the way that you see my distraction. Because when I see it, when I have a vision for what he's seeing, then my intentions and means can line up. But if we don't have the right vision, the intentions and means only take us further off track. Another next step I'd offer you is this particular article is written. It's really lengthy. It's quite long, but our problems are quite deep. It is particularly written about pornography, but you could substitute just about any other struggle in your life for the word pornography in this article. I've posted it at the bottom of the message notes. If you go to ourjourney.news, you scroll over to message notes, and on the very bottom of it, you'll see a link to an article. Spend time reading. It talks about this VIM principle. It talks about a lot of the things we've been talking about today, but it'll help you take some very clear next steps toward some significant healing in your life. It's not an easy read, but let's face it, it's not an easy problem, is it? The truth is that our calling and our actions and our power and our strength and all of our good works and all the stuff we've been trying has never really cut it, is it? Because what's missing is that cry that we sang out earlier, that all of you really is enough for all of me. And what God really wants isn't our behavior. It's not really our feelings. It's not our calling. It's not something out of us. He wants it for us because he just wants our heart. Let's pray together. Jesus, we're just thankful that you give us stories like Samson that play out with such animated ways that we can imagine seeing and being a part of. So God, we're thankful that we can see that picture and even what the struggles and seeming failure look like. But God, we just pray that today you give us power that comes from your Holy Spirit, a boldness to be able to ask and see life in our struggle the way that you see it. And then we just want the intentions and the means to follow you. And we ask it in your name.